Two of the big things that you pivoted towards that take up a bulk of your research is these two different concepts, one being right-wing authoritarianism and another being social dominance order, or RWA and SDO. Could you break these two ideas down and how they relate to unpacking the rejection of science?
People who endorse an authoritarian and a hierarchical or socially dominant worldview trust scientists less. And people who trust scientists less are less likely to believe that climate change is happening. They're less likely to think that vaccines are safe. They're less likely to think that GM food is safe. They're less likely to think that fluoride is safe. And they're less likely to think that evolution explains species today. And so across the board, trust in scientists seem to be the key link between those deeper beliefs and our views about scientists. And in the thesis, I then go on to speculate about why people high in RWA and SDO trust scientists less. But I wasn't able to answer those questions because I'd run out of time at that point in my life. But it really set up the idea that we can try and explain the links between these really fundamental beliefs that on the face of it just have nothing to do with science. Like whether you think society should be structured in a hierarchy has nothing to do with the greenhouse effect or that carbon dioxide traps heat in the atmosphere, right? But somehow these two very different kinds of beliefs become connected. And that was that later part of my thesis was trying to explain those links.
You wrote an article for New Zealand Skeptic journal in 2020. The article was titled Kiwi Science and Trust and focused on the trust of scientists specifically, people working in the field. And the sort of initial table, the graph that you show on the article shows the trust in different professions. And it was fascinating reading this and sort of seeing that scientists were actually the third most trusted behind nurses and doctors. Scientists works its way down, police and teachers sort of in the top third, somewhere in the middle are television news readers, to sports people not very trusted, and right at the bottom, perhaps unsurprisingly, politicians and real estate agents. And to sort of summarize this article, within, say for example, human-caused climate change is occurring. Within people who do trust scientists, there's this 92% belief, whereas within people who don't trust scientists, there's 65% belief. So there's still 65%, it's still over 50, it's still a significant proportion, and yet the drop-off is a big enough chunk that you can say, well, there's something about scientists as a group, as a community, that causes that drop-off. And across all the examples that you provide, with vaccines, fluoridation, evolution, there is a drop-off.
Yeah, it's the broad spectrum factor there that if you are less trusting of scientists, you're less likely to adopt any one of those sort of scientifically established claims. Less likely. Again, it's so easy to talk in absolutes about people who trust and don't trust. And indeed, in that example with the percentages, I had to lump people into groups as trusters or non-trusters or believers or skeptics. When in reality, we all hold a kind of beliefs that range along a spectrum. So it's always a little bit unfair to lump people, but it's a great way to try and show the difference is that, there is a real difference between people who adopt a more trusting perspective and those who don't. Thankfully, those who don't is very much in the minority in New Zealand, but it's still enough to have an impact, and it might be growing. That's a whole other conversation there, but there's been shifts in beliefs in certain groups in New Zealand and overseas that have really positioned themselves directly against science.
Thanks for watching PhD Unpacked. If you enjoyed that little snippet and you want to watch the whole interview and have access to a whole bunch of extra stuff surrounding the PhD Unpacked project, head over to Patreon and become a patron. Patreon.com/PhD Unpacked.